Hi, everybody. It's Ben Callahan, founder of Redwood's design system community. I want to welcome you to The Question, episode 68, part 1, with my co-host TJ Pitre. We're going to talk about design systems as AI context. Let's get into it. Tell us really quickly just a little bit about yourself. What's happened in your world that sort of like shaped, who you are today? It's a big open question.
So how far back should I go? Let's see. I can probably fast forward through this. Um, Started as a wannabe comic book illustrator. Found out pretty quickly that that's a pretty cutthroat industry to get into. Got rejected a couple of times for portfolios. Thought I was going to be a comic book artist for Image Comic Books in Anaheim, California, for the longest time. That was like my dream. This was right around the time when I was entering college. And then when I realized that that wasn't happening, I got into like graphic design, and then started taking courses at Tulane in multimedia design. And then so I learned Photoshop and that kind of suite of tools. Back then, this is going to be dating myself, but there was a suite of tools through a company called Macromedia. And then Macromedia were the ones that came up with Fireworks and Dreamweaver and Flash back in the day before Adobe had purchased them. And I was using those tools to create like little stationery packages and things on the side for local small businesses. And there was this one particular small business called Stafford Tile and Stone. Shout out to their Magazine Street here in New Orleans. They're still around, and I think they still use my logo. But after I delivered that stationery package, she was like, "Hey, can you make me a website?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And I had no idea how to make a website, but I knew how to use the Macromedia suite. And so I just remember going in Fireworks, designing it in Fireworks, and then like splicing out a little area of the center to make this like cross-fading cool carousel gallery thing using Flash. And she loved it, and she kept it up for like 10 years, and I enjoyed the process of doing it. And then fast forward, I think Flash was probably the gateway drug that got me into front end development, because I think I started to see like the connection between like moving shapes and manipulating objects with code. And that was probably like ActionScript 3 was the thing that I think I connected with most to JavaScript. And then once that got triggered, there was no going back. I got into internships, being since I had the design background and I had the front end development background. It was great because I was like getting underpaid to do two jobs for a long time. Um, I ended up getting a job, or post Katrina, the hurricane here was a big deal, and I ended up getting a job for Emeril Lagasse, the celebrity chef out here, as the webmaster, because that's like the term, that's like that, I guess that was like the full stack term back then. And then the rest was written, because after I worked for Emeril for a bit, the celebrity crafting lady Martha Stewart purchased the portion of Emeril that I worked for, and then that moved me to New York. And then I ended up being a front end developer for Martha Stewart and all of her web properties. And then within 6 years, I worked my way up to being the director of front end development for all of the various Martha Stewart digital properties. And then at some point, I said, I want to go back home to New Orleans. And I gave a 6 month notice and said, I'm going to start my own thing. And then my boss and mentor at the time, name's Ira Tao, fabulous guy, was like, "We want you to be we want to be your first client." And I was like, "Okay, I'm not going to say no to that." He said we need to pass it by Martha first. And so he said, Martha's cool with it. I just need a letterhead, a stationery, basically a stationery package. And I was like, well, I know how to do that. I've done that before. So I did a little letterhead. I came up with the name South Left, and I have a whole story on our blog on the website about how that name came about. And then they were like, stamp of approval, moved back home. Martha Stewart signed a full year, 40-hour a week engagement. So that was like all the padding I needed to get this really off the ground and running. And I also had a lot of the other clients that I was going to bring with me as well. And the rest was written. So that was really it. And then a year later, I hired my first employee, and she's still with us to today. And then back then at Martha, we were doing that was like our first like journey into modular development. Nicole Sullivan had a big impact on us, or at least on me, in the way that we treated the way that we built systems in the digital team at Martha Stewart, because we always used or object oriented principles. So we always had these little like modular component libraries before they were called design systems that we were already doing and using within that organization. And then over time, the idea of components and reusability of these components just made sense. And then so ever since, like, from, I guess this is like 15 years ago now, from like the moment we started that at Martha to now, is just how component based development made its way to where we are. And then just the instill of AI part came about 2 years ago when OpenAI opened up their API for us to be able to play around with. And just being curious front end developers, we dove headfirst into it, and the rest is how I got here.
Yeah. TJ,
I try to keep that
it's
short.
no, that's great. I remember the first time you told me sort of that story, and I just was like nodding along. I mean, like our paths are very similar in that path, in that way, and so it's really cool to sort of like see how we have similar origins, but have sort of like also approached things in different ways. And it's really fun. So congrats on such a long run running a studio. I know how hard that is. And it's really an achievement. And that you still have folks with you from those early days is a testament to probably your culture and who you are and how you lead. So thanks for taking some time to be with us today, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We let's start with the question specifically. So we work together on this like we always do with our co-hosts, and TG and I spent some time talking and sort of back and forth in a Google Doc, just trying to figure out what should we ask, because this is a big topic. Like we were thinking, we knew AI is the topic we wanted to hit on. That's where TJ has been focused so much, and so we landed on this idea of these three questions. One, how prepared is your design system to act as reliable AI context today? And we gave you a scale to answer that on, 0 through 5. Have you experimented with having AI generate UI based on your design system? Yes, no, or other. And then finally, an open text question. If yes, how do you feel about the output of your AI? And if no, what's keeping you from trying this? And so we got this sent out to 1,031 design system practitioners, and we got 148 responses this week. You can, as always, click this link to go see the raw data yourself. There's a lot of really insightful answers. Y'all always amaze me. You take some real time to kind of answer these things. Before we look at the specifics, I just want to say one thing, which is, like there's a lot happening in the space right now. And just even today in Redwoods, some of us have been talking about, what does the future look like for us as practitioners? And like you can sense that in these conversations. At least I can see this in async conversations, and I can read it in some of the answers that y'all submitted, that there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of unknown. So I think before we dive into this topic with full on excitement, I think it's really smart for us just to pause for a moment and just like acknowledge the uncertainty that sort of lives here. And I don't know what the future holds, and I have a lot of concerns about the things we're doing, and I also just want to I want to understand that stuff better, So it's like I think for me, I'm a curious guy. I'm always going to be trying to learn, and that's really kind of what we're trying to do today. TJ, I know you and Brad and Ian are working on a course, and you mentioned that the whole first section of this was similar to this sentiment. Can you say just a brief bit about that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that sets this course apart from a lot of the other the courses or educational things out there is that we're trying to approach this with empathy for everyone who has ever felt any feelings of uh, discomfort around AI or anything that's like um, social pressure or pressure from your manager or the organization that you're working with about. We understand how overwhelming a lot of these pieces of what we're about to discuss are, and this is like from the whole spectrum of just internalizing feelings about, like, am I too late to this, how am I supposed to keep up with the fast pace of AI and my job at the same time? And then all the fear and doom and gloom parts about, like, is this going to take over my job? And is what I'm doing just irrelevant? a good portion of the first chapter of this course addresses that as best we can, because we do need to what we do need, and it's our duty to acknowledge a lot of this stuff. So everything from like just personal feelings, and then the pressure that comes with like we need to leverage AI, but we don't know how, and like how frustrating and how much tension that can cause within organizations, all the way down to like the environmental aspects of it we try to cover. So there's a large section about principles and how we feel about it, uh, to make sure that there's like a level field where it's like
Yeah.
we want and feel as though we it's our obligation to acknowledge this before we go on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, there's a lot to unpack there, right? We're not going to be able to address all of that today, but for the sake of this conversation, I just kind of want us as a community to approach the topic with like an acknowledgement of the tension, And so let's just try to do that. Let's try to hold some space for that with each other and try to be sensitive to the wide variety of emotional states that folks are in regarding this stuff, okay? Um all right. Oh my gosh, look at all these beautiful faces. Thank you all so much for being here. It's so cool. um, so those first two questions that we asked were a little bit more quantitative in nature, and so we, of course, we're always, taking a peek at what that looks like, visually. I'm a visual thinker, so I mapped these out, by the numbers. And just a reminder too, these kinds of things, none of this is really statistically significant, right? Like we've got a small number of respondents that are very niche audience, but it's nice as a conversation starter, and that's really kind of the goal here. So in that first question, just about preparation, how prepared do you feel? It's weird because we have a lot in this bucket that is sort of like just above center, but most of the answers actually fall below 50%. And so you can see the average was a 2.27 out of 5. And so a median of 2. 54% rated themselves as a 0, 1, or a 2. And so there were really only 15% that rated themselves very highly. So that kind of is telling a little bit. And then the next question was, have you experimented? And a lot of folks are experimenting, right? So on one hand, folks don't necessarily feel prepared, but we're still experimenting. So that's kind of fun to see, 62% yes, 28% no, and 10% had some sort of other qualification, in their answer. So I don't know, TJ, if you had expectations around these answers, like what were you thinking we would see here?
I think this is on par with what I think the two things. I think it's what people think it is, and this was the expected result. I think in reality, it might end up shifting more towards the left side,
Mm,
the first two, but I think that's something we can get into later on,
yeah,
at least with a lot of the discovery work that we've been doing over the last year. The it's subjective on the idea of what exactly is AI readiness and what does that mean downstream as like the disciplines cascade within that product development life cycle. But yeah,
yeah,
happy to get into that part later. But this is about on
yeah.
par with what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, and you're right. Like the way we're asking this question in particular, we're just saying, what do you believe about your
Hmm.
preparedness? And so maybe that's a great place to start. And also, folks, just so you know, this is where you can raise your hand, jump into the chat, just jump into the conversation. Okay, that's what we're here to do. But TJ, let me just ask you that, like, what do you think the gap is between what people believe preparedness is and what, in your experience and with your research, it actually is?
Lots to talk about, lot to unpack on this one. But
Mm,
there's um, there behind the scenes. So it all starts with these days. It feels like whatever your source of truth is can vary. So the in our context based design systems workflow right now, the majority, like overwhelmingly, is Figma. So if Figma is like your canonical source for what everything else would be derived from, so if the cascade starts at the very top level with Figma, then context cascades into developed components all the way down to the product engineering side of things. Often when things start to derail is in that in between design and development phase where typically you would involve AI. And then a lot of times what ends up happening is in the early days of like before Figma came out with their official MCP, there were just standard APIs that we're using to connect to Figma, just to use some execute functions to see what we can get back, and then we'd get back like a JSON spec, and then we'd work with that. And a lot of times in the beginning, it felt like this is all AI's fault. Like AI is not like AI is hallucinating. We're not ready for this. And then it was really easy to cast judgment and say, okay, this is cool. I like the concept of this, but it's just not ready. And the more and more we started to dig deeper into the source of truth side of things. So in the case here would be like the Figma component that we're trying to transition into code, we started to see cracks. And a lot of these cracks, just because like Figma is the majority of it is visual, you don't see. And before things are signed off or signed off to be in the queue for development, there's a lot of this like unsexy stuff that happens underneath that typically get bypassed or just don't get recognized. So upon further inspection, I want to say this is like we were inspecting like a banner component or something for our altitude internal design system, and it's a React and it's a web component based design system, and we were testing a custom. We in the early days we had a VS Code extension called Figma Bridge, and it was pretty simple. It just tapped into, this is before MCP, so we just enter our personal access token and then add the canonical link to the button or the banner or whatever it was, and then it would use the Figma API to pull in a JSON file, which is basically the component spec, and then we would use AI to like use that spec to compile that component, and it worked well to a certain extent until it didn't. And then we would see the code that it presented, and we would say things like, we have if it was like a composed component where there was like nested components that were within it, it was like recreating a button icon, or it was recreating like an icon button, one without a label. And then we'd go back and then we'd find that there was a part of that component set that was like a detached part of the component. And it's like, okay, so now like this trail is starting to materialize into something like, all right, so upstream, there's something going on that's impacting this AI from not necessarily hallucinating, just misinterpreting the intent of the thing it's trying to create. So going back to the original part, it's hard to say exactly. There's the feeling of my component library on the canonical source is comprehensive. It's intact. Everything is great with it. But then there's a lot of things, especially with these like really large comprehensive component libraries, where there's like lots of global libraries that are being imported for different design systems that are all within this like hierarchical structure, it's hard to keep all that in one place. We have tools that we've created to help with all those things, and it discovers and humbles you. It discovers a lot of those cracks and humbles you a little bit, because you start to see where those cracks are that could be unidentifiable when you're in there. So
Yeah.
one of the big reasons we created that Figma lint component, Figma lint plugin, is because we got into so much, I don't say trouble, but when you're an agency and you're carefully trying to price out projects, and we're working with other organizations that are complementary to what we're offering as a service, and their side is design, and so they're on the hook for creating the design system, we would then inherit that design system, but then we'll see things like, well, wait a minute, the whole properties panel is missing properties. There's no like states or variants or stuff in here. I see like pretty pictures of hover states, but none of these things are connected in any kind of way. So then we'd either have to like go back to them and say, hey, we need these things to be created, or we'd end up, just taking it upon ourselves and doing it on our own. So that was the main catalyst for creating the Figma lint component, because then that allowed the designers to like, all right, is it ready? There's the visual state, whereas the hovering art director is like, that looks like it's ready to go. Like I see the hover
Yeah.
state, I see the disabled state. Let's go ahead and pass it along. But then when the developers inherit it, they're like, wait a minute, I see hard coded values here where tokens should be. I see detached components. Doesn't feel like it's where I need it to be. So I guess that's where
Mhm.
I feel like some of this that 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 middle area might sway a little bit on that left side, mainly for the underlying unsexy stuff that you're just not even aware of. that things
Yeah.
like the tools that we use today in our workflows expose.
It's interesting, TJ, because in the data, in the responses, especially to the open text one to Q3, question 3, there's a lot of folks who I think are seeing what they call like slop, like it's kind of the word we
Yeah.
use, right, on the output side. But I think that people are sort of like understanding what you're saying. Like they see it as like an invalidation of the actual system rather than a failure of AI.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of an interesting shift because I think for a long time when I've asked folks about this, if the output's not good, their instinct is just to say the model's not good enough yet.
Right.
So maybe we're reaching a point, it sounds like in your opinion, that like, hey, if we can be really intentional in the sort of like early stages, we can get much better output. And that there's one I've tried to kind of capture just a few little observations and statements, but there was this one statement that I kind of kept coming to me as I'm reading through these things, which is that
Oh man, put that on a
infrastructure
t-shirt.
wins, infrastructure wins over prompting, right? So like that to me is like, okay, there's so much to unpack there, but like what is included in that infrastructure? Like that's a big word, right? So like folks, raise your hands, jump in. We want to hear from you. But TJ, also, like while we're waiting on folks to kind of find the nerve to raise their hands, can you just say like what are the big categories of infrastructure in a statement like this?
Yeah, that's a great, and I want to give a shout out to one of our colleagues who's an amazing design engineer. Her name's Murphy Truman, and
Yeah.
she has this. We've had the opportunity and a great honor to work with her on several projects and continue to do so. And she and I have worked in this realm. We instantly hit it off. There was an article that she had put out almost a year ago that was talking about design systems as APIs. And we were also working on something very similar. And then we just connected through LinkedIn. And then it was like kismet. It was like instant, like, okay, we're both on the same path here and we're seeing eye to eye on where we feel like things are going now. And in I've been working on tooling to automate a lot of these things, and she's been working on these like diagnostic assessments. And I just posted the link to it in the chat right there. But this is like a really comprehensive overview of basically like the state of your source of truth, of like how AI ready, how MCP ready, if you're
Yeah.
using MCPs, is your design system. And it approaches it both in a very traditional sense, like there's like obvious things that you want to make sure that your design system is in shape for when you're going to be just doing the handover, like a
Mm.
standard traditional handover to a development team, like hard coded component, hard coded values, and instead of using tokens, and making sure all those things are aligned. But this one goes a step further. So the pieces that AI are really important for consumption is context. Like we always talk about, context is like the word of the year of 2025. And so I feel like 2024, the word of the year was prompt. I feel like I've never said that word as much as I had in my life in 2024, but last year was definitely context. In the realm and of like your with the assumption that Figma is the canonical source of truth for everything downstream, then there's the traditional things that are always in place, which are like the aesthetic parts and all of the properties of the components. So like your component spec. And then there's the things that are like outside of that. So your properties panel, there are things that belong in the properties panel that may not be visual, ARIA labels, things that could be there because it's something that provides additional context for the AI to understand in order for it to know things that are beyond a look and a feel. What we're trying to get into on the Figma side of things are things that are more purposeful and intentional. And I think that's the part that AI really absorbs to understand not just the way something should look, but also how it should behave. And I have a lot of writings on this on our resources on especially throughout LinkedIn, but I highly recommend reading up on Murphy's Substack as well because she does a lot of writing on this topic.
Yeah. Yeah, she's very prolific. Have the I have the delight to have her in Redwoods, and so it's been really fun to get to know her. Although the time zone's always tricky. I think
Oh,
she's
I know.
very, very west
I
of
talked to her
us.
from
So
like 8 p.m. to
yeah,
11. That's
yeah, yeah.
whenever.
Nice. All right, we got some folks. Here, Davey, what's up, my man?
Hey,
What you
good to
got?
see
Hey,
y'all. Hi,
dude.
TJ. Good to see you.
Hey.
I one thing that I recently talked about on our design system podcast is
Yeah.
the well, context is very important, and the I think one thing that we're running into at Atlassian specifically is like we've done a very good job at producing documentation.
Mm.
We make Confluence and we make Jira, but we're a Confluence wiki making machine. We make really good wikis and blog posts, and we talk a lot about our stuff. But that's very much around just when the stuff is made. So we track decisions, we track. Launch plans. We describe how things work, but then shortly after the thing is released, it's sort of like gone, like dead to me. This thing, like we're probably never going to revisit it because we're always just focusing on the new stuff. So what's been happening in our org is we are very AI forward. Luckily, we have the leadership to allow us to experiment with different tools. TJ, we're trying to get approval to see if we could use the console MCP.
Yeah.
We're trying to use everything that we could get our hands on, typically, but the LLMs don't know what bad is. So the LLMs don't know what articles are out of date, and when we've tried to create like our own agent that has specific instructions, that has guardrails to tell you this is where you actually look for like the true run books and the guidelines and such, people will still navigate towards our general agent, and they're not gonna know that some of the stuff is out of date. So we do need help with human checking things, human verifying things. Like it's still very much we are still in the driver's seat in terms of crafts, but then also whether something is out of date or not. So
Yeah.
I think that's just the major sticking point. At least we're doing a better job on the Figma side of keeping mocks out of date. But even then, like if you spin up like a presentation for a specific point in time, you usually don't come back to that presentation.
Yeah.
So Figma and LLMs could see everything, but we need that sort of gate to mark whether something is good or not.
Yeah. Yeah. May I respond to that?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, this is a common pattern that we see with working with a lot of organizations too. And one of the things that we've tried to do to address this is um, a lot of times in traditional design system workflows, it all boils down to communication. And so, if it weren't for any AI involvement, then the typical answer for a consulting engagement would be talk more, have some sort of like automated Slack or Teams response that would pop up when things happen, just to like make sure that there's top of mind awareness for like change logs and updates or whatever things like that would happen. We all recognize that communication is harder. We work in remote environments. We work across multiple different time zones. The ratio for designers to developers is sometimes like well off, where it's like, two designers to 60 developers and vice versa. So one of the things, I don't want to like make this sound like we're just constantly trying to throw tools at it. We're just trying to create things that help align people the best possible way that we can to facilitate communication, whether or not it's like happening from a hey, I did this kind of thing, like in a traditional sense, and oh, okay, cool, I hear and acknowledge that, to something like, hey, this thing exists for you to be able to communicate to, and this process has been automated. So if there's two lines of communication, we're narrowing that communication down. So instead of it just being so difficult to be able to facilitate that communication or solicit communication in general, we're trying to bring it to a point to where you can actually like, okay, now the thing is there and available to work with. Now it's a matter of like how you do it. And then the thing that I'm talking about is if you ever get the opportunity to use Figma Console MCP, there is a tool in there that it's called Design to Dev Parity. And then one of the recent or two LinkedIn posts that I post were about this. And really the idea is that you line up two components, one on the Figma side, one on the coded side, and then you designate which one is like the canonical source. So you want to say like everything on the code side is right. I want to make sure that, what are the deviations? Where has the design drifted from the code? And then you could do the same thing with either side. And then what you get returned back is a basic report that says this is how bad it's deviated, and here are the instructions on what should be done. What would you like me to do? And if it's design is the canonical source and development needs to be updated, then what will end up happening is that it'll create a Jira ticket, or it'll use any other API that you have, or CLI, to go ahead and create those tickets and assign it to anyone on the team, or a GitHub ticket. And then vice versa, if the canonical source of truth is the coded component, then it'll create Figma comments on all of the different areas of the component set and component variants that need to get updated. And if it's something like properties or metadata, then it'll just put the little comment on the component set itself. So once all that's done and dusted and taken care of by each discipline, the engineer and the designer, there's another tool in there that runs a documentation check. And then that documentation check is what it runs through, and it'll recognize what the component is and then recommend what some of the purpose and intent is of those components. And then what that'll do is give you markdown files that could act as that part that the rest of your team could use and acknowledge going forward. And then the tool that I'm talking about, that we don't always try to throw tools at things, but we have one called Company Docs, which is an MCP that's basically a boilerplate that all those markdown files end up in, and then get moved into a vector database by Supabase, and then put into a Slack bot or any other bot that you want. So instead of having to reach out to someone or access a document site or go to anywhere else. Of course, this also works well with with Zero Height and any other design system documentation tool, or Mintlify or DocuSource or anything like that. So you can do this. It could serve multiple duties. But if someone needs to know something, whether or not a component's been deprecated, they can use the tool of choice. So they can either go to the documentation, or they can just query it in Slack and say, what's the state of this switch component? And then because you've used the Figma console MCP to run that parity and get the current state of it, the documentation tool leaves a change log at the bottom. And so you could say something like, this is, in version 2.3, this is going to be deprecated. And then that'll come through in the conversation. So yeah, anyway, we're not trying to throw tools at everything. It's just trying to ease the communication and just make things a little bit simpler for everybody, to ensure that everybody's active within the whole ecosystem of the design system.
TJ, it sounds like, if I was trying to sort of generalize what I hear you saying, it is, and tell me if I'm misunderstanding, but like you're sort of suggesting that it's not okay to just do all the work as humans and then feed it to AI to do some big thing. Instead, maybe involving AI throughout the process of making decisions around things and documenting those decisions in a way that is helpful in the future is a better approach. Is that kind of what I hear you saying?
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it. We always say AI works with you. AI is supportive. AI isn't replacing you. So there's nothing that AI does, or nothing that we recommend within a context-based design system workflow where AI does your job for you. You are always in the driver's seat. AI is always in the passenger seat, and they are your navigator. They're the person. That's the tool that we use to help. Anytime you ever get to the point to where like AI did a thing that you don't know, and then you build on top of that thing that AI did that you don't know, is the moment you start to lose track of what's going on. That's derailment to me. But because we're all like we're all design systems practitioners or enthusiasts, and we're all well disciplined in our own skill set and in our own role within that design system ecosystem, then it behooves us to be aware of what it's doing. So going back to like any MCP, like the Figma MCP, where it's like, transitioning from a coded a component, a design component into code, the developer should be aware of what's happening there. And then in the workflow of the context-based design system workflow, there's context engineer part. That's the role of the person who's in the driver's seat watching what the AI is doing when it's coding that
Yeah.
component. And then when things go through pull requests, we had hoped that there's some human oversight going, wait a minute, like
Yeah.
this is using a different method than we would use, or like these imports don't look correct. And so like those things would get caught there. So yeah, there's nothing that I would ever say that it's like just set it and forget it.
Yeah.
Like make me a design system and then go to bed and
Right.
check it the next morning.
Awesome. All right, let's get some other folks in here. Ryan, what's up?
Hi.
Hey.
So I've experienced a lot of what folks are saying around communication and documentation. And the good news is we have lots of people working on this problem. The not so great news is that as a result, we have lots of different sort of half completed experiments. And we're experiencing this sort of like context sprawl where Figma could, in theory, be the source of truth. But like a lot of folks have said, the designs don't match the code one to one. So Figma MCP server doesn't have good context. We've got at least 2 homegrown MCP servers that have varying amounts of completeness and correctness. We've got other sources of context that I don't fully understand. So I guess I'm curious, are other folks experiencing this sort of context sprawl? And if so, how do you chart the path from like 5, 6 sources of truth to one source of truth?
That's a great, good question. Anybody have thoughts on that? Go ahead, Taylor, if that's a response to the question.
Yeah, hot take. Wait. No, I'm serious. I mean, there's so much shit out there right now, right? And there's so many people who have the space and the capacity and the time and the extent and the like all the things to like dig in, right? Like we don't. I think this is a good opportunity. Like to your point, like of we don't need to add more slop to the slop, right? Like let the folks that are working on it hard do the work because they're coming out and they're asking for questions like this, right? And they're coming out and asking, hey, give feedback. Like we don't need to muddy the water more. We can trust some of the folks that are doing and then iterate together. Like I wish that was the way we approach this because I think that's part of where all the fear mongering comes from and all this stuff, right? You got everybody and their mother cooking up a new idea, which is just a regurgitation of something else, right? And then purporting as like new thing you must know when it's really not like that.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm so glad you said that. You don't have to be on the bleeding edge of everything. The media and the people who post so much about these things, who are like talking about how much AI has 10x their development and all this stuff, it's overwhelming. But you don't need to do that. Like there are other people who are doing that for you. But like there is nothing wrong with this waiting and seeing. And and then this is how we got to, I don't know, like this. I remember when AI first came out, there was like Perplexity and Claude and OpenAI in Grok and all these tools. Eventually, like there's going to be the ones that rise at the top, and you're going to find the ones that work best for you. But after a while, like there's a couple that are going to drop off, and then it's going to be much less overwhelming for you to make those decisions. And this it's not the same here. We're in a very much more niche community, like because of the things that we're trying to test. But there's going to be a moment when dust settles, and then it's going to be the ones that are like, okay, obviously the community has adapted. Like, I don't know. We could relate this to like back in the day when there was Zerb framework and Bootstrap, and it's like all of a sudden, Bootstrap kind of emerged as the winner in there. And then you could say the same thing about the CSS stuff. Like there was like a Tailwind was the one that came out, and then all of a sudden it became the thing. Those are totally okay things where you can just do what you're accustomed to do and what you're comfortable doing if it's working for you, and then just see what ends up being the thing, and then make some concerted effort to devote some time to look into it to see whether or not it's something you could fold into your workflow.
Yeah,
But that's a really good
great.
point.
Yeah. Ron's point in the chat is relevant too. He's saying in the UK, they were first out of the gate with steam trains, but now the rail system sucks. Same thing. Actually, in the US, we were first out of the gate with over the wire phones. And so like we have all this infrastructure that's just hanging around above ground, with ice on it, breaking and whatever, so, and all that's going on. So Jeff, Natalia, or Greg, do one of you have a response to this question or a new thread? If you're in order, go ahead if you have a continuation.
Well, I've got something that's probably a continuation and perhaps a new thread as well. So, I'm very much a web standards, wait for the JavaScript craze to pass kind of guy. But what I'm going to talk about is very bleeding edge. So I'm curious if anybody has experience with Figma Code Connect, because that's what I'm working with on a day-to-day basis right now. I answered this first question that we are not ready to use our components as context for Figma's MCP, and that's just because we are just scratching the surface. We started with button and icon because we're like, let's just do a demo and kick the tires on this thing. The aha moment is pretty cool when you publish to Figma, and you can, when you're in dev mode, see the coded component properties change as you're clicking around in Figma. I mean, that's pretty great. And then, of course, the end goal being all of this work is in support of giving context to Figma's MCP, so that a product engineer, as they're handed a design file, rather than just looking at the code in the Code Connect box, they could copy and paste. They could instead say, build me this view that you see from Figma, give it the URL of the Figma page. It already has the context of all the components from the design system. That's a very holy grail, pie in the sky distant thing right now. I think we're going to learn a lot as we're going through this process, because just with button and icon, it's like, we've got properties that are design only. We've got properties that are code only, that we've landed on a sim prefix for design only properties, and then like a hidden layer looking at Nathan Curtis's articles and such for code only properties. But it was a larger effort than I think we understood at first, just to get through button and icon. And so I can't imagine what it's going to be like when we get to like date picker and modal and form
Data tables.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share that. A lot of this stuff is stuff that I'm working with, day to day. And so I was just curious if other people are using it. I'm also using AI for other stuff that, like GitHub Copilot and VS Code with Claude to search through an entire product code base, look at all the routes, and then build you like a sitemap visually that you can copy and paste into FigJam so everybody can work on it together. Like that saves like, I don't know, a week of going through the code and trying to figure out all the connections. And so there's some other really cool benefits there, but yeah.
Nice. Anybody want to respond to that, or we can have Natalia jump in with a new thread?
I
Go
can
ahead,
jump
Guy.
in if it's possible. No, I'm not Guy, I'm a fake Guy. Sorry, because I thought I
fake
signed
guy.
up, but I didn't. I'm an imposter.
You're that guy.
What's your name?
My name is Mohammed Avid. I run the engineering side on Guy's team.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I thought I signed up, but I didn't, and I'm shameless.
No
so
problem.
I took Guy's link.
Hey, Mohammed.
Hi, TJ. How's everything?
Good.
So I wanted to say on the Code Connect portion, we have about 97 components that are connected right now. So if you have DETs or component examples inside your code, you can run an agent that can upload all of those to Figma with all of the available variants you have up there, and it's going to enhance like the design to code quality, I think, by at least 40%. So if you're suffering with that, then Code Connect is the way to go. Of course, we're trying to work also on the console portion, like on the other MCP that TJ team has, which I think is going to be better than what Figma has right now. But it's all about context. So if you can upload all of your variants from the code examples into Code Connect, and then once you're pinging the Figma MCP, the dev mode MCP, is going to return back those in the frames, in the middle of the frames, in a really weird format, but in the middle of the frames. So it should enhance the output that you're having right now.
Excellent. Sounds like you and Jeff need to have a chat.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah, Code Connect, I have just a quick thing on that. I have opinions on Code Connect, and it's one of those things that feels like it's very use case specific. Like it's like I see benefits to it depending on the infrastructure of your design system, as well as like how your team is structured and like how you can create that flow. I've also seen organizations that were trying to fit it in because they felt like they should, because like a lot of them are just really comfortable with the Figma ecosystem, and they wanted to kind of create like this, like, design a thing, Figma make it, and then get it in use the Figma MCP to create it in code and sync it back to Code Connect. But then they actually weren't using Tailwind, or there's some things that were like discrepancies between what was happening on the Code Connect side. And it felt like it was like one additional thing to manage that wasn't really contributing much value. So in instances like that, it's like you can zoom out and kind of think about like, in this system, is this really necessary? So, but I definitely hear a lot of benefits to it and how it's helping teams. I've also seen a lot of teams try to use it and try to figure out how to make it work, but just at the end of the day, it didn't really match up.
Yeah, makes sense. Natalia, what's up, friend? How are you?
Hello. I'm going to
Natalia.
continue the conversation we had. And hello, TJ. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So everybody here who I've talked to about design systems, which is amazing, what a great crew, knows that my hot takes are often centered on the people. As a manager, I'm always thinking about people. So I'm a data dog. We are like engineering heavy. The code is the source of truth. We're all in on that. The Druids MCP is just humming along, adoption really high. So like I put like we're pretty prepared and we're seeing some really exciting stuff. And I wanted to say like how do we prepare? How do we move to like what tool do we do? I've used the metaphor like it just sometimes feels like dodgeball, like people are just throwing tools at people, and you're like, stop. Like even if it's a hit, like I just like there's too many, it's a barrage, and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And it's just like I'm seeing like Figma shops are like, I can make Figma AI, or like we can shove AI into this. And I found that like how is everyone doing with preparing the skill sets of their people? Like for me, I'm like, however this lands, I see Figma as a great whiteboard divergent thinking tool, but the second you're like, done, I have it. And you just spend the rest of the time annotating and preparing it for handoff. Like you should have already jumped into something else and jumped into the shared language, for example. So I'm like, I'm pushing very hard, like end to end. I hate it, but I'm like, yo, we need to be fluent in the medium now, a lot more now. So like that's my like hot take stance is designers need to learn the medium because the barriers to contribution are lowering. I mean, I'm a manager and the AI has me being able to I push to production. And so like the barriers are really lowering. So what can we do with that? And so for me, I'm like, how are you all approaching the skills you're asking your teams or your designers especially to learn, given this barrage of tooling coming out? Because we're thinking long term.
Yeah. Who's got any answers to that? TJ, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll just take a first stab at it.
Yeah.
And thanks. And that's like it's a hot topic because it involves almost a complete detachment of a tool that we're all very accustomed to and have always had as like just like a very like a staple within the ecosystem of generating design systems. There's a whole movement on kind of bifurcating and moving towards a new canonical source of truth. And that's why like whenever you hear me say, I always say like whatever your source of truth is, and then I'll say like whatever the assumption I'm going to go with the assumption that the source of truth will be Figma. A lot of the work that we've been doing and a lot of the discussions that we've been having with like Murphy and then another colleague of mine, his name is Tony Maximilian. He's a amazing developer and design systems engineer. Is that it's and also Kevin Coyle is another one who's in these conversations too. It's like design systems don't need to start with the canonical source of truth being something like Figma. It's perfect if it is. If your team structure is set up that way, then that's totally fine and it's very valid. But it can also set up a contracts. Like if there just needs to be, it's great if you're code base, if that's what you're looking to too, but it also feels like the code base needs a fallback. Like there needs to be something set up in order for something to come from. And the code base is already opinionated because it's got its methods on how it's styling. It's got its methods on whatever framework it's using. It's got all of its imports and all like whatever decisions have been made for that technical architecture. But it feels like it needs some sort of like spec structured language to fall back on. So whether it's like a Markdown, XML, JSON in written contracts. So these are basically like your UX contracts that would map to tokens, that would map to specs for your component structures. That feels like the future. But I also agree with what you're saying too, because it's like you need a scratch pad. Like there needs to be ways to get your ideas out of your head, in Figma still to me is like one of the perfect places for that. There's also Penpot, there's also Adobe Illustrator, like whatever you want to use to get your ideas out are up to you. Like use the tool that makes the magic, and that's great. But then when you identify what those things are, then you move it into something where a designer and a developer can get together and then establish these contracts. And then those contracts act as context. And then that's the context that you would feed the AI to ensure that your code level, where that comes into play, is the most intact, and your AI is the most aware of what it needs to do. And if it ever has any derailment, then you can go back to the contract and adjust there and then re-import. So anyway, that's my 2 cents with that on that topic.
I love it. We've got 2 minutes left. Guy, you want to throw an answer in? Give me 1 minute and then we'll pop to Ismail for a minute.
Oh my God. Wow, 1 minute. I'm gonna
You're on.
have the I think the increasingly hot take that I don't think designers should push code to production. We think, oh, it's all like I used to be a developer for 10 years, and the most dangerous word in the English language is just. Oh, it's just updating this one thing. And without understanding the system, you have no idea what possible implications are. Also, us as design systems people, I find it a bit alarming that we're so ready to throw away all the scalability, maintenance, support structures around releasing something in production, and we're fine with designers should just go and update those things. I'm not saying let's not give people the ability to do that, but I think there's so many implications we need to be aware of. Like, for example, I know from our experience that when we open contributions to people, it was great for them. They learned a lot of things. Our workload doubled.
Yeah.
Because we had to review all that. By saying, oh, designers should just push to production, what is that invisible labor that we're pushing on other engineers, for example, to go and do that we're not taking into account? So,
Yep.
I don't know, very quickly on those things. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Guy. Awesome. Ismail, last word, my friend.
Super quick double answer. I'm super agreeing with Natalia, because at a point I had like a story last week with one designer of my crew that I tried to make her learn how to use AI, and she really used it the bad way. It was about it was not directly like a component subject, but much more wider design system one, to generate some surveys for the audits. And she just made a super prompt, which is the same thing as a filter in Excel. So she totally misunderstood how to use AI and what is the real capabilities of AI. And just to answer super quickly, Guy, I think that's what PR are for, like push request. It's true that a lot of time the quality won't be there, but finally the push requests are there for other developer or more senior person to say, yes, it's good, no, it's not good, and to give feedback. So next time it could be better, or it could be better by using another model or another way to do the thing.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, goodness gracious, folks, this one flew, and I'm already scheming about how, TJ, we can get you back and talk some more about this. I think the community would appreciate it. But TJ, thank you so much for prompting the conversation, for being willing to commit the time to do this with me and with the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I agree. It's definitely a lot to unpack here, and it's multifaceted. So if you ever want to do a part 2 of this, I'm happy to come along.
Yes. Excellent. Well, folks, we're past time, so I understand if you need to bail. There's a lot of resources in the FigJam file. Please tell me something you're proud of. Drop us some information about you if you're looking for a new gig or if you have an open position. Check out some of the stuff. Oh, one other quick note. Some of us in Redwoods are going to Config this year out in SF, and we are planning to do a hike to see the actual Redwoods in Muir Woods. So that'll either be before or after that event. We're not quite sure yet, but some of the rangers in Redwoods are like really excited about this. So we're planning something. No details yet, but would love to have you in the community and to have you join us, for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So much good material here. TJ's team and he are always releasing great articles. So please be on the lookout for those things in LinkedIn. Get connected to us if you're not, okay? All these people up here in this top box are folks just like you trying to solve the same problem. So take a minute, look through those names, get connected on LinkedIn. Let's kind of strengthen that sort of external community that we all need, okay? Great to see you all. Thank you so much for being here. TJ, you rock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you all soon. Cheers.
Bye, everybody.